LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the White House has confirmed Donald Trump's Middle East envoy will travel to Gaza tomorrow. Steve Witkoff will inspect aid distribution sites and secure a plan to deliver more food to Palestinians. It comes as Canada has joined France and the UK in revealing plans to recognise a Palestinian state from September. Former US Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, has told LBC that makes no sense.
I'd like one of them to tell me what the Palestinian state they're about to recognize looks like. It's commonly understood that to have a state, you have to have a clear boundary, you have to have a defined population, and you have to be carrying on the normal functions of government. In the case of quote-unquote Palestine, there's no boundary, there's no defined population, and there's sure no government carrying on the normal functions of government.
A 76-year-old man continues to be questioned over the suspected poisoning of 8 children at a summer camp in the village of Stathern in Leicestershire. Police were called to report of them being unwell on Sunday. All of the children were taken to hospital as a precaution but have since been discharged. The Tories have described the number of migrants crossing the Channel as a new national emergency. Almost 900 people arrived in the UK on small boats yesterday, taking the yearly total to more than 25,000. Nurses in England could soon vote on whether to strike or not. They've rejected a pay offer for next year of 3.6% and say they feel deeply undervalued. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says the government and NHS staff have to be partners.
We know the workforce of the NHS have had a difficult decade and a half. We know how they feel. We have put substantial money into the NHS in the spending review. We put substantial money into public sector pay. But we ask them to work with us.
Resident doctors, formerly junior doctors, this week ended a 5-day walkout. And heavy and thundery showers are hitting southern parts of England amid a yellow thunderstorm warning. The alert is in place until 9 o'clock tonight, covering areas including Bristol, Oxford, London and Kent. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 4 points at 91.32. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.15. LBC weather, drier towards the southwest tonight. A few lingering showers in places, a low of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. As you know, Thursday at 8, we like to talk to one person throughout the hour. I interview them for half an hour and then we take calls. That's how it's going to work today. We're going to talk about Parkinson's disease. Because I suspect that, like me, most of you haven't had a lot of contact with somebody who's got Parkinson's. My first time really talking to anybody who had it was with the former leader of the Liberal Party, Jeremy Thorpe. When he rang me up one day, this voice came the other end of the phone. I couldn't make out what he was saying. And then I eventually sort of worked out he was saying that he was Jeremy Thorpe. And I thought, oh, I know, he's got Parkinson's. So I kind of thought, OK, well, let's keep listening. And he wanted me to publish a book. And he hadn't really been in the public eye for nearly 20 years. So I went to see him. And he had Parkinson's effectively since the early to mid-1980s. So for nearly 20 years. And on some days, it really affected him badly. I mean, you could barely make out anything he said. His hands would shake constantly. And then on other days, it was not as bad. But his brain was as sharp as a tack. And I mean, it was about a year that I met him probably every few weeks to talk about the book. And I really sort of have fond memories of that time. We went to stay with him and his wife at his house in Devon. And we got to know him quite well. And it sort of shattered, I suppose, some of my preconceptions, because I think if you see somebody who has got obvious signs of Parkinson's, it's one of those things where I think people tend to talk at the person that they're with, saying, oh, is he okay? Rather than saying, are you okay? And you know what I mean? It's people don't quite know how to react to people with visible diseases like Parkinson's or motor neurone. We did a phone-in on that not that long ago. So when I found out that my colleague friend Rob Burley had got it, it was. I mean, you genuinely don't know what to say in these situations, and I certainly I don't pretend that I know better than anyone else. And Rob has been, I think, in the past few weeks, really quite courageous in talking about the fact that he was diagnosed in 2021, so 4 years ago, and what it's been like to travel on this journey with Parkinson's. So Rob has joined me in the studio for this hour. We also have Dr. David Nichol with us, a consultant. Sorry, David. A consultant neurologist who works for the NHS in Birmingham, who specialises in Parkinson's disease. So welcome to you both. And David's going to chip in because obviously neither Rob nor I are qualified to talk about the sort of medical side of this. So, Rob, let me start with you. Welcome.
Thank you.
This interview came about because you sent me a message saying, look, I did this interview the other day. Can you have a look at it and tell me what you think? Explain in your own words why you sent that tweet.
So I was on Camilla Tominey's GB News show on a Sunday morning, and it was the first time that I'd been on anything, and I've been on a few things. I mean, I'm not on telly all the time, but I do things, and I go to public events and stuff, and it was the first time I'd had any inkling that anyone was watching me thinking, in their terms, well, he's a bit weird, he's odd, is he pissed? Well, they were seeing something, right? They were seeing something from me when I was doing this interview with Camilla, or doing the paper review, and I want to know from you. I know you'd be honest. You know, are they right? Do I look weird? Am I moving around a lot? Am I slurring? Or, as I know, all things I know I'm capable of doing at different points. Was that going on? Because it hadn't really happened. I didn't think before. And clearly, I mean, can you remember what you said when you saw it?
I can't remember exactly what I said, but I didn't think you looked weird. I thought you were moving around a little bit unnaturally, but only a little bit. It wasn't sort of... you didn't immediately look at you and think, oh, my God.
No.
But you could tell that there was something that was just a little bit away from the normal.
Yeah, and recently...
But then I know you, see, so I wasn't sure whether I was actually the best judge of it.
So you might not pick it up in a way. Someone completely fresh might think. I mean, previous to that, I'd done a podcast, and it was one which is visualised, and I was watching myself. And this is obviously, I'll describe what I'm doing. I was watching myself, kind of doing this kind of. I'm doing a circular movement as I was doing. I was engrossed in the work. It was like I was involuntarily moving in a certain way, like almost like I was dancing in some way, funny way, and so it was. But I was aware of that. I saw that. I thought, well, that's a bit weird. But this is the first time I think that people were tweeting, like, is he drunk?
Yeah.
Is he on drugs? You know, whatever. So something was going on.
And how did that, when you saw the people writing that, how did that make you feel?
I mean, briefly, it was it's the first time that it's that point, as I put in the piece I wrote about, is the pointed finger going, look at the weird person, look at the disabled person, look at the different person. And that had never happened to me before. And I suppose I realised how important it had been to me. And perhaps, well, still is, that most of the time I don't present as such, right? But it's going on. I remember doing a podcast with you ages ago, and you asked me about it, and I said, well, I can feel it now. And you said, well, I can't see anything, but I could feel it. But increasingly, obviously, it's a sign that it's progressing, that you start to not be able to hide it. And that's the thing, that was the moment, it's a milestone, because I couldn't hide it anymore.
Let's take you back to that moment in 2021 when you were diagnosed. You clearly had felt that something wasn't quite right. What wasn't quite right?
Well, actually, there's a couple of things. So one of the things you mentioned, I worked at LBC for a bit, which was true. I worked with Andrew Marr with his new show. I noticed when I was doing that show that, that moment when it's an hour before TX, which is transmission, and you have not got any guests. They've all pulled out. and you're like, normally that's sort of it can be a quite fun thing, because you're like, right, what are we going to do? Start again, let's do this. I found it really hard to just kind of get through the stresses that I was so used to down the years on live television mainly. To get through that stress of figuring that out and leading a team on that, I just couldn't do it very well, and I was shaking it, and I was finding myself internally like I was feeling a tremor of some kind, and so that then led me eventually I think I was reluctant to really do anything about it initially, but I was noticing as well my feet were sort of not lifting up properly as I was walking around, and so I went to the GP who didn't want to say the P word, but she was obviously suspecting Parkinson's, and said to me then, this was not long after COVID, that I'd be waiting a year, to see a consultant to establish what this was. But it got so bad that I ended up in A&E. And when I went to A&E, I was, they first asked me, are you an alcoholic? Because you're shaking. I said, not yet, but perhaps on the way to that, But I thought it was going to be this. But then the worst part about that particular experience was they did some checks, and you can't test for Parkinson's, but you can test other things. It might be like, why is he shaking? Is it to do with like some other thing going on in his brain? And they said it's an all clear. They said to me, which I took to mean an all clear for everything, including Parkinson's disease. So a few days later, about probably a week later, I went to see a consultant a few miles away on my own, driving, and I walked in there thinking it was something else, and she just dropped the kind of coshed me on the back of the head and said, you've got Parkinson's disease.
And I mean, when you're in that situation, does your whole world fall apart, or are you just thinking, well, I need to know information, I need to know what's going to happen now, or is it just a very emotional thing? Because people often talk about when they first hear the C word, cancer. Yeah. And I imagine that it must be a little bit similar to that.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I think everyone. I mean, one thing about Parkinson, a theme is that everyone's different. Yeah. People, I don't know if I wanted information. I just wanted to get out of there and sit down somewhere and just go, what has happened? What is this? And without necessarily engaging in, well, I'll now get on and do. I haven't been one of those people who's immediately kind of really focused on the things you need to do to make it better. I've just sort of tried to live with it. And maybe that's the wrong approach, but I don't want to be consumed by it and thinking about it all the time. It's bad enough when I think about it, I can feel the symptoms.
Yeah.
The rest of the time I try not to, until now. And so I've started talking about it a bit more because, I think obviously it's useful to do so. But for a year, I didn't tell anybody.
Anybody?
But no, sorry, I shouldn't say anybody. Externally, so outside the household. Okay. I didn't, I just thought I'd be written off. I thought I'd be thought of as kind of someone just over the hill, that poor, oh dear, it's a shame, he used to be something. Yeah, that kind of thing. You fear that's what will happen.
And we live in an industry where that can easily happen, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's better now, but eventually it just became too much to try and conceal it. I'd rather just be honest about it, but it takes time to get to that position.
Well, let's bring in Dr. David Nichol, consultant neurologist who works for the NHS in Birmingham. David, you've listened to what Rob said. How typical is his story of the people that you're dealing with?
Oh, very typical. And that uncertainty when someone comes in. I mean, the diagnosis of Parkinson's is difficult. In fact, of patients seen in primary care with suspected Parkinson's, the GP will be right about half the time. By the time they get to a neurologist, I'm talking about that first consultation when a patient like Rob comes in, you'll be right 90% of the time. And sometimes, it might be seeing what the response is to treatment and things. But I think the story is very telling because you can just picture how your whole world, you think you've been told the scan is okay, and then think, oh, everything's all right. And then you go in and your kind of world falls apart. And it is, it's a difficult consultation, the new patient with Parkinson's. So you kind of hope there's someone else in the room because, you can just picture it goes in one ear and out the other. But it's about explaining what it is. And like Rob said, no two patients with Parkinson's are the same. And I'm very conscious, even people listening in, there will be people, listening in today who've got a diagnosis of Parkinson's, and there'll be other people who've had Parkinson's for, 10, 15 years. So you have to have quite a nuanced conversation about understanding diagnosis and understanding what the effect is in the terms of their quality of life. And in fact, just thinking about, I had a colleague of mine, a fellow doctor who had Parkinson's, and the first time I saw him, I wasn't quite sure. And you're kind of thinking when to mention it or not, sort of thing. And I'd probably procrastinate a little bit and say, well, why don't I see you in a few months' time to see how things are, get some of the tests and see. So, the diagnosis can be difficult.
How do you diagnose it then?
Well, the most important thing is the kind of clinical history and examination. So, it might be a history of rest tremor, problems maybe with buttons or zips, or difficulty writing, although obviously most people are typing rather than writing these days. Or like Rob was saying, that dragging sensation in the leg, difficulty walking. And sometimes you can actually hear it when people are walking here, the kind of slapping of the feet, just slightly different. And then on examination, looking for signs of kind of what we call bradykinesia, or slowness of movement, and maybe rigidity in the arms. And in fact, the most important thing I find is going out to see the patient in the consulting room and watch them walking in, because often you can see the face looks a bit impassive. And again, that relates to what Rob was saying. You can see, particularly in the media, where your appearance means everything. People can misinterpret that as, well, looks a bit miserable. Why is there such a misery guts? And actually, that's the expression, not smiling as much and things. So it's putting all those features together. And then the acid test is actually whether someone responds to medication and things.
Who was Mr. Parkinson?
James Parkinson was GP in London, and it's an interesting story, essentially the end of the 18th century, early 19th, that basically he described 6 cases. Half of them he didn't examine, it was just people he saw on the street, and described this kind of syndrome, Parkinson's disease. And in a way, I actually don't like the term Parkinson's disease because it implies it's one condition, when actually there are a number of different things which can cause Parkinson's. And maybe that explains some of how people vary so.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about the disease itself and Rob's experience in just a few moments' time. And if you'd like to call in, if you have Parkinson's, if you have a friend or a relative that does, what's been your experience? And if you've got a question for Rob or David, feel free to phone in on 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
19 minutes past 8 on LBC. We're talking to Rob Burley, journalist and TV news producer. Before we go on, Rob, let's talk a little bit about what you used to do, because you were editor of the Andrew Marr Sunday morning show. That's when we first met.
Yes.
And then you came to LBC, and then you've had various other broadcasting jobs since then. So you're a real sort of political media anorak. Is that being fair?
I don't.
And you've written a book.
I've written a book.
We should talk about.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. I suppose I've done a lot of political TV. I never really see myself as an anorak. I'm not really interested in Parliament. I was interested in those big encounters in TV studios, or like a show like Politics Live, which I devised, like kind of dynamic, where you have kind of a good setting. But obviously, I did okay. I ran the Andrew Marr show. I ran live programmes department, and actually my job at the BBC ended not long before this happened. It was like a double blow of kind of your expectations of what you're doing changing, and it's quite.
And your book did very well, didn't it?
Well, it's done all right, yeah. So that was nice. So one of the things I was able to do while kind of working out what to do next was to write up this book called "Why Is This Lying?" I don't think I can say it. Okay.
Well, it's the title of the book. Why shall I say it? Then I can get into trouble rather than you. Why is this lying bastard lying to me?
Yes, which is all about it's about the history of political interviewing in Britain. But that sounds really boring. It's actually got quite a lot of good anecdotes and jokes, and it had in it a couple of chapters about Brian Walden and Margaret Thatcher, and that turned into a TV series with Steve Coogan.
Which was brilliant.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Well, it was brilliant, and I must admit, I think I told you at the time, I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be brilliant with Steve Coogan cast as Brian Walden, but he was superb.
He was superb, yeah, and Harriet Walter as Margaret Thatcher,
Yeah.
who didn't look anything like her, but somehow for me just absolutely kind of owned it. So that was all good. So and one of the things actually I'd like to say about Parkinson's as well is I think those things are linked to it in the sense that I do think that I've got much more drive and creative energy because of it's coincided with it. It feels to me like a positive aspect of it has been it's sort of changed that. I'm not worried about being. Well, if I want something, try and do something. I'll ask for it, and if I get it, I get it. If I don't, I'm not going to be worried because it just changes your philosophy. It feels different. I don't know. It's something about that. I mean, I don't know if David has any insight on that. If that's something that happens to people, I've certainly heard that it does.
Well, if you've just tuned in, Dr. David Nicholl is with us. He's in Birmingham. He's a consultant neurologist. David, I know you've got something you want to ask Rob.
Well, I was interested in the piece you wrote because I think you said you had a family history. And whether that played into things at all, and it sometimes gets asked.
Yes, so that was actually the assumption was that I didn't have a family history and it wasn't genetic, but and it wasn't. It's not tested as a matter of routine. But I went obviously. I was keen to join clinical trials for any drug that might become available, and they one of those did do a kind of a test for a genetic cause, and it turned out that it was genetic and it wasn't environmental, which is what I think was assumed. So, and I've since discovered that there are kind of cousins who've had it, and maybe, and so there's probably some passing on of it. I was just looking up because I was listening about Ozzy Osbourne and wondering about the precise version of it. I think the genetic versions have different names, don't they? They that might mean different things about the progression. What do you know about that?
Well, it does vary. I mean, the way I think about Parkinson, it's a complex disease. Like diabetes or hypertension, there are genetic factors and things. So, but there are rare genetic forms of Parkinson's which actually have proved extremely useful for learning even about the non-genetic forms of Parkinson's. So there's basically a protein called alpha-synuclein, which is abnormal in Parkinson's, as exceedingly rare genetic cause, but it is directly relevant to non-genetic forms, and that's where a lot of the research is going on as well. But for most people, it's not something we generally do genetic tests on unless it's, younger age onset and things. There won't be a cause. Won't be a cause identified.
Right. I mean, let's get back to basics here because you can't catch Parkinson's off somebody. I mean, normally when you talk about a disease, you think, well, you can catch it, but you can't catch it. So David, how does it how is it sparked? Because obviously Rob has lived... How old are you, Rob?
I'm now 56, so I was 52
at the time. So you're 52, so something must have sparked it off at the age of 52, but...
whenever it started, presumably it started before then.
Well, presumably it's something that's latent in your body and something sparks it off. I mean, I'm saying that as a layperson. David?
When I say it's complicated, it is, okay? So there are even extremely rare environmental causes. So in the 1970s, there were some drug addicts in California that were trying to get around Californian drug laws and used a synthetic drug called MPTP and ended up with Parkinsonism. So people spent years trying to find some kind of environmental toxin that was a bit like MPTP and haven't found it, okay? So you can get those extremes of, rare environmental causes and then the other extreme rare genetic causes. And it's probably, a mixture of things. Genetics definitely is a role, but it's not, it's not like other genetic diseases like Huntington's disease or, so that's when I say it's complicated, I mean it is.
Oh, and what made you want to specialise in it?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I love neurology. I found the kind of diagnosis process, trying to work it out. And indeed, and I'm thinking back when I did my PhD, which is on the genetics part, because I remember people saying, "Why are you doing?" Because it's not genetic. And the way we traditionally find out whether something's genetic is doing twin studies, and all the twin studies suggest it's not genetic. But I think I do find it fascinating because of the stories of people like Rob and things like that, and just managing patients. I find very interesting because you're having to manage those expectations of essentially a progressive condition, and there's that where the floor when you get given the diagnosis on your world is seems like it's coming to an end when that isn't the case, is helping people to understand what's going to happen next.
It seems to me as if it's one of those diseases that we still don't know enough about, that there's still a lot to discover. And there is no cure, is there? So there are presumably drugs that can maybe sort of slow it down a bit, but is that as good as it gets, David?
Well, not yet. Okay, so there's been a huge amount of effort trying to find neuroprotective drugs. So there was something that would slow progression, and we haven't got that yet. But there are some very interesting studies being done looking at drugs that would, I mentioned about this protein alpha-synuclein, for example, that would help damp down that faulty alpha-synuclein. So I think some of those clinical trials will be very, very interesting in a way that I wouldn't have said that, even 10, 15 years ago. But, it depends, but doing clinical trials in neurodegenerative diseases is a challenge.
Rob, let's talk about what's happened over the last 4 years and how it's progressed.
Yeah.
How have you, how have you coped with it? How has your family coped with it? Because obviously it must, I was going to say put a strain on. That's not what I mean. Yeah, but I suppose that the family dynamic will be different, I guess. Yeah. But how has it progressed after the last 4 years?
Well, the thing about it is it's so hard. I always find that hard to answer because the nature of the interaction between the drugs themselves, the drugs that you use to, as I understand it, the drugs, they're not slowing it down. They're sort of they're masking it. Well, in the background, it's progressing, and you're managing that. But also the drugs often have side effects that are quite wild in themselves, as I said in the piece. I find myself falling asleep if I took certain ones in the middle of the day. I would feel worse, or I wouldn't be able to sleep. And it's really hard to disentangle the actual the drug effects which are there to sort it out, and the actual thing itself. So you're always just trying to keep this thing going. Like you try and get the right pattern of drugs, and then that may fall away and vary. For the family, it's difficult. For my 2 children, and I have to say sometimes I can't really come and play football now because I'm just going to not be able to do it because I can feel it. Other times I can absolutely play football, even as well as I always do. But I can play, and it's not a problem. And exercise is really good, but sometimes it will just fail me, and I won't be able to do it, or I'll be too tired.
And do you know at the beginning of the day this is going to be a good day or this is going to be a difficult day? A bit. And when you say you can feel it,
yeah, it's coming. It's like it's so hard.
Describe that.
I mean, part of it is this inward and then visible tremor that's inside. Almost felt like it was internal for me rather than external initially. There's a kind of feeling of like pins and needles I get in my hands, and so when I'm trying to type, I'd write, that's difficult. One of the main things is I sleep really badly because I never was great, but it's really bad. So it might be 2 or 3 hours, and I just learned to live with that. But that has an effect on everything on the subsequent day. So again, it's a disentangling thing, and yet the progression. I think it is progressing. I feel it now. It's like, and I think that moment on television was sort of the moment when I kind of realised that I couldn't hide anymore from this progression. That it is happening more behind the scenes, as it were, of my life. But it's difficult. It's hard to be precise. It really is.
And David, I guess it's different for every person. I mean, we're all different human beings. We all have a different physiology. We all have a different mental capacity. So the progression probably is very different for different people.
Oh, absolutely. And if I think of the range of patients I see, I mean, the youngest person I've seen with Parkinson's is a teenager. Okay. But for most people, it tends to be, commoner as people are older. So, people in their 70s and 80s. So the kind of presentation may be different, and the kind of problems they have may well be different. And also managing, someone who, like Rob, who's, working age is maybe very, very different from someone who's retired and maybe has lots of other medical problems. And, so you need to interpret that both, actually also just thinking about their life expectancy and the kind of things they expect. So lots and lots of questions that will be very much individually directed according to that patient and their age and their expectations.
I always feel sort of awful asking this question with Rob sitting me directly in front of me, but I mean, for life expectancy issues, I mean, as I say, Jeremy Thorpe, who I know, I mean, he died, I think he was in his early 90s or late 80s. It didn't seem to have any effect on how long he would live, but is that typical?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, so people may well have Parkinson's for decades. So I don't know Rob; he's not my patient, but I would be very much saying we need to plan ahead over the next 20, 30 years. Yes, how this will progress, but how to manage your treatment, not give too much medication. Warn very importantly about some of the side effects about medication. Ask about other symptoms that maybe the patient may not be aware of. So Rob mentioned about sleep problems. Often the partner might explain that, that they've had this problem where they're acting out their dreams for years, punching out in the sleep. And that's a condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, which can sometimes predate even the tremor or other symptoms by decades.
Right, we're going to come to your calls in just a moment. If you'd like to ask Rob and David any questions or you've got any comments about living with Parkinson's, we'd love to hear from you. Rob has referred several times to a piece he's written. It's on unheard.com, and that's unheard.com, from the 25th of July. Well worth a read, obviously, after you finish listening to us for this hour. It is 8:31 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The White House has confirmed Donald Trump's Middle East envoy will travel to Gaza tomorrow. Steve Witkoff will inspect aid distribution sites and secure a plan to deliver more food to Palestinians. A 76-year-old man is continuing to be questioned after a suspected poisoning at a children's summer camp in Stathern in Leicestershire. 8 youngsters had to be taken to hospital for treatment but have since been discharged. The Tories have described the number of migrants crossing the Channel as a new national emergency. Almost 900 people arrived in the UK on small boats yesterday, taking the yearly total to more than 25,000. LBC weather drier towards the southwest tonight. A few lingering showers in places, a low of 9 degrees.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
8:34. Rob Burley is with us, journalist and TV news producer who was diagnosed with Parkinson's in November 2021. And Dr. David Nichol, consultant, I nearly said conservative again, consultant neurologist who works for the NHS in Birmingham, who specialises in Parkinson's disease. We've got lots of WhatsApp messages and texts coming. We'll come to some of those in a second, but let's go to our first caller. It's Simon. He's a new caller in Wrexham. Hello, Simon.
Good evening.
Evening. What would you like to say?
Well, I was asked if I had any questions, which I don't really, but I was diagnosed in 2016 when I was 52. So a lot of what Rob says resonates. And David also, the diagnosis is not the end of the world. It's just you have to adjust your life. You meet some great people. I've met some really inspirational people with cure Parkinson's. I've cycled across the Alps with Mike Tyndall and Ian Bolshaw and Will Cook, who try and cure Parkinson's. And it's trying to get that sort of tribe of positivity around you to address something that ultimately is a bit bloody depressing. But exercise for me is my go-to place for slowing down the progression, even psychologically. Although the research shows it's probably the only thing that does slow down the progression. So that's really what I wanted to say, I think.
And you sound remarkably positive.
Yeah, I mean, I am. Stuff happens to people. A lot worse things happen, and Parkinson's. When I got diagnosed, it wasn't the case of winning the lottery, but I went in thinking I had motor neuron disease. So I came out thinking, well, it's not as bad as it might be. But I guess the biggest, one of the sort of the things that is hardest is the impact it has on your family, having support from your family and friends, and people are generally kind. But it's a bit of a bore.
That's a very British way of putting it.
I agree with that. It is a bore, yeah. It is a bore. It's interesting. Hi, Simon, it's Rob. It's interesting. Hi, Rob. I mean, one thing I struggle with is I admire you're going up mountains and on bikes, and I couldn't do that. I'm just the opposite of that, and I find it. I think we should talk about the fact that I'm not very good at being a Parkinson's patient, or in that sense, if you know what I mean, like joining and mucking in and doing, all that. I find that quite not me, and so and I feel I'm sort of letting the side down a bit by not doing it, and I admire the fact that you have. So thank you for doing it. I'm sure you raised some money for it for research and stuff. But do you know what I mean? We're not all the same, and I can't ride a bike up a mountain. It's not going to happen.
Well, you say that. I never thought I could till I did. I did it really slowly. Yeah. But yes, we are all different. And I realise I'm probably in a very fortunate position that I've got the time to train. I mean, I'm 59 now. I still work, still run a company, work in Liverpool. I do realise that I'm fortunate to be able to do what I can do, because it is pretty much all-consuming, trying to keep on top of it, reading the research, taking medication, taking drugs, looking at alternative therapies and things like that. And it is all-consuming. And there are times when you do feel like you're on your own. And that's where I find, having mates with Parkinson's who I've met in the process, and the support you get from each other. I mean, the worst thing you do when you get diagnosed with Parkinson's is jump into the world of Parkinson's, because you wouldn't come out of it. But it's sort of introducing yourself slowly to it. But yes, everyone's different. I'm lucky.
What has it stopped you from doing?
That's a difficult question. I think what it does is it brings a stop to where you think you might be when you're in your 70s or your late 60s, your retirement. I'm not quite as resilient as I was, when I was younger. I was in the army many, many years ago, and I look back and think, the sort of the physical restrictions and perhaps the mental restrictions. I think Rob feels the same. David was seeing it. But, the analogy I had before I got diagnosed is I'd look at a roast lunch. You'd have chicken, potatoes, bread pudding, all that stuff, and you wouldn't know where to start. And someone who's quite decisive, and I think that's one of the things that's robbed me, is my ability to make quick decisions, or be I guess I get sometimes a bit confused when I've got too many options. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, no, it absolutely does. Simon, thank you very much for being our first caller. Really, really interesting. David, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, it's just interesting question for Simon and also Rob, actually, is when to pass on information. Because I think if, let's say a patient came in and saw me today and, I just made the diagnosis of Parkinson's, the last thing I would do would be, say, join the local Parkinson's group, because you've just given the diagnosis, and then, go and see a bunch of other people who've had Parkinson's for 10, 15 years would not be the right thing to do. On the other hand, there is a point where that networking is really important.
I mean, I say in the piece, I mean, and this is with no disrespect or anything to what the people who arrange these things or the people taking part. When I first showed up fairly early as a class for people to, you're supposed to, there are various things that you do with your body to try and rather than do this. I'm now, for listeners who can't see, you're kind of moving inward, you're moving outward. That's what you should be doing as Parkinson's, because the body will try and make you smaller. I went there and I could not last. I ran from that place. I ran because for me it was just this is what I want to avoid. I don't want to think about this yet. And while I'm not feeling the symptoms, I don't want to spend my time in that world. Was kind of my reaction, which was not very nice in a way, really. I should have been more sort of mature about it, but that was my honest response. And I know, as I said, I know that I'll have to go back to that at some point. I will have to walk through that door and do it.
100% agree with that. I mean, I did exactly the same thing, ran 100 miles. And, because I think the answer to the information question is, you'll learn as you go along. You don't want to be told this is how you are. And it affects so many people so differently. I've got the stiff Parkinson's, not the shaky Parkinson's. So I think it's sort of, as you as a neurologist recognise the changes, it's trying to come up with a strategy to deal with those changes that aren't just, you've only got a limited armoury.
Simon, thank you. I guess it's interesting that you sort of recoiled from that, Rob.
Yeah.
But you're sitting here now talking about it. You've written this article about it. You're willing to be open about it and talk. And in a way, I think that's. I can understand why you don't want to do the kind of things that Simon was doing, but that's the way that you can do, because you're in the media. You can talk about it. You can be heard. And I think a lot of people listening now will be really grateful to you for doing that.
Well, it's not particularly noble, but I think what happened was that I was presented with this event, which was like I couldn't hide it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's good that people talk about who aren't visibly in a bad way, because it's not always like that yet. It's not like that yet. And there's so many variations, and so this is a good conversation for people to understand about it.
Is that what you fear most?
What?
That you won't be able to communicate.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, communication and mobility are the two things that scare me. I mean, the great unknowable, the great fear is obviously is that prognosis. What's going to happen in 10 years? What's going to happen in 20 years? You have in your head, rightly or wrongly, you have a kind of roadmap of your life, and this is taking on down different roads. Didn't know. So in a way you just kind of live it and you try and manage it, and at times it becomes obvious that the drugs aren't effective enough to deal with it this way. But the big unknowable, it's the big scary thing, is that if I knew that I'd be ill at 80 or 75, then that might be easier to handle, but I don't know what it'll be like at 69 or 68.
David, is that typical?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think what I'd do. I mean, and it depends on what stage someone's at. So I would definitely be fudging the conversation if, I was saying something like Rob in the first 12 months. But if I was maybe 4 or 5 years down the line, I'd be saying, well, think of how things have progressed over the last 4 or 5 years. If it's progressed fairly slowly, it's quite likely to continue to progress quite slowly. So you do get a kind of view, probably in the first 2-3 years about which way things are going. And I suppose I have a conversation like that, then there are other people who progress much, much more rapidly, and then you would be having a different conversation about what's happening next. So I kind of worry about the patients who are having early falls, worry about patients who may be starting to get problems, maybe visual hallucinations or cognitive problems and things. Those kind of things, because there are important conversations you need to have even at an early stage. So, some of the new diagnosed Parkinson's, they need to inform the DVLA, that kind of thing, yes. Driving and things. Yeah.
David, one thing I mentioned in the piece, and I can return to, is the positive thing, which is this thing about creativity. Is this something you've come across? Which I've heard people talk about it, and for me, it's been definitely true. Which is that I'm more motivated to do creative work. It's better, and I'm just kind of doing lots of things, and that's been a positive in many ways.
Yeah, I actually, you talking, I was thinking, I've got a patient of mine who's a stand-up comedian who jokes about his Parkinson's, and he actually brings his disease into his act, sort of thing. So it's a different type of creativity.
Christine says, thank you, Ian, for an interesting programme with your guests. My brother had a diagnosis of Parkinson's, and when he didn't respond to medication, he was then diagnosed with multiple symptom atrophy and passed away 4 months later at the age of 66. Very difficult for his wife and family. I mean, I suppose that just, David, again indicates that sort of every person's Parkinson's is different.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's a really important point. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning that, if I see someone with suspected Parkinson's, I'll be right 90% of the time, but 10% of the time I won't be. And multiple system atrophy and another condition, progressive supranuclear palsy. I don't know if you remember Dudley Moore, he had that. So they don't respond to medication and they get other problems and tend to progress much more rapidly. And they're particularly difficult because there really are no effective treatments.
Jack says, tonight I'm in the RVI hospital in Newcastle, sitting in a chair bed with my 89-year-old mother, who's just had an aggressive cancer removed from her lymph nodes and who also happens to have advanced Parkinson's. The anaesthetist said she was steady and solid as a rock throughout her 3-hour op. Her heart, lungs and all her other organs are strong. She's sleeping at the moment but has already been joking with the nurses. Her secret is that she's always been fit, eaten well, done a lot of walking, never drunk alcohol or smoked, and continues to live independently with lots of support. She is fierce. Her consultant calls her stoic. She doesn't complain. She still tells me off. I'm over 60 myself. She's an absolute legend. Well, Jack, please wish your mother all the best from all of us here. What a fantastic text to send in, and thank you very much indeed. We'll come to more of your calls and texts in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Your opportunity to put your calls and your questions to a man who's rarely out of the headlines. Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, is in the studio. George, you're in Cheshunt.
Our son, Christopher, just 15 years old, he was murdered by an attack propagated through social media 3 years ago. Had the Online Safety Act been in place, then platforms would have been forced to restrict harmful content. Do you acknowledge that this law is a matter of life and death?
There has to be a tech answer around this. I don't know what it is. Certainly the government doesn't know what it is. I'll tell you what, George, here's the real danger, that if you go through a VPN, you can then access content on what's called the dark web, which is even worse than what you can find online now.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player and the new LBC app. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
10 to 9 on LBC. We're talking about Parkinson's disease with Rob Burley and Dr. David Nicholl. David is in Poole. David, you've been waiting a long time. Apologies for that. What would you like to say?
The main point I was going to make, is, having looked after my wife with Parkinsonism for many years, is that 85% of such folk do not have tremor. And that is one of the main reasons why it's difficult to diagnose. Those 15% that do have tremor, are more evident. Does Dave Nicholl agree with that?
David?
Yes, but the other complicating factor is there are other forms of tremor. So there's a condition called essential tremor, which is probably 10 times more common than Parkinson's. And so I get a lot of people... Yeah, a lot of people referred with, is this Parkinson's? And, I say, oh, no, it's clearly not. But then that's because I see lots of patients with Parkinson's. So sometimes to diagnose the tremor itself can be hard. And the other thing is sometimes we use that in a way to help prognosis-wise. So those patients with Parkinson's that present with a rest tremor do have a slightly better prognosis than those that have no tremor at all.
Right.
But it, like all the caveats we said earlier, it does vary a lot.
Right, yes. I'm a retired GP. And the other things which I observed with my wife was that, it took over 10 years to make the diagnosis, and she made it herself when she was watching TV with a group of people with Parkinsonism when they were dancing. She simply said to me, "I've got that." And when we took her to the local consultant, he made the diagnosis mainly on the basis that he asked her to walk backwards, and she just couldn't do that. I don't know whether you do that with your clinics.
David? I think David's Zoom. Is frozen. Right, David, you're back with us. Yeah. Did you hear what David said about his wife? Yeah.
Well, I always have a habit of going out to the waiting room to ask the patient to come in, not out of politeness, but just to watch them walk in. So I oftentimes I'm able to make the diagnosis as they're walking in, because you see they're not moving one arm as much as the other, so the loss of arm swing, and maybe dragging the leg slightly on one side, and looking for the kind of facial expression and things as well.
David, thank you very much for that. Question here for you again, David, from Chris, who says, can you ask your doctor guest whether Parkinson's disease has a gender bias and a typical patient profile?
It's slightly more common in men than women, but I'm not sure there's a typical patient profile, really, because of that, other than it's much commoner as people get older. So in terms of, it's second only to Alzheimer's disease in terms of, common neurodegenerative disease. So it gets commoner as people get older. But, as I said, probably about 10% under the age of 10% under the age of 45. So you kind of have younger cases as well.
Nick says, first of all, thank you for bringing David Nicholl to speak about Parkinson's. He is truly one of the foremost experts in the field. Well, we don't have rank amateurs on this programme, Nick. I had the privilege of being one of his trainees some years ago, and I wish Rob all the very best with his ongoing treatment. My question is this. With such a broad and evolving landscape of treatment options in Parkinson's, how does David personally approach the early therapeutic decisions? Does he favour a particular class of drug in the first few years, and does he believe any carry a meaningful neuroprotective effect, or are we still largely treating symptoms alone?
I mean, at the moment we are largely treating symptoms alone, but the first question I ask is how is their Parkinson's affecting the quality of life? And some patients may not want to go on medication to start off with. They may just maybe want to wait, or maybe they don't like the idea of tablets. So initially, I would probably put someone on levodopa cinnamate. It's an old drug, or an MAOB inhibitor. The other class of drugs that's really important to mention now is some people are on dopamine agonists, and it's really, really, really important. We talk about impulse control disorders because about 15% of people can get this. Just explain this. People might start changing behavior in terms of gambling or become very sexually disinhibited and things like that. And you can picture. I can think of one patient of mine who was a financial advisor who blew £50,000 in a weekend when his dose of dopamine agonist got changed. So it's really important to warn people about potential side effects. Obviously, most people are okay, but it's important to have that discussion about medication and the risks and benefits of any particular drug.
Shibley says, as a medic, I'm learning loads by listening to both Rob and David. Dr. David Nicholl is always a font of neurological knowledge, and we like his expertise and his manner very much. Well, you got a fan club developing here, David. You could be a new celebrity doctor. Right, David is a new caller in St Helens on Merseyside. Hello, David.
Hello there. My partner has developed Parkinson's about 5 years ago, and it is progressing, and we can see that it is. One of her symptoms is that when she's walking with her Zimmer, she goes up on her toes and makes her very unstable. I do keep saying to her, you must keep your feet flat, but the next minute she's up again on her toes. So it's... and also, she has COPD as well as Parkinson's, and it is essential that you do exercise with Parkinson's, but unfortunately, with the COPD, she's very limited to what she can do. So it's a vicious circle. She wears a Q1 on her sternum, which gives a vibration up to her brain. When she first got it 4 or 5 years ago, it worked wonderful. But now, as the Parkinson's advancing, it is now at full stretch. So it is not as effective as it was when she first purchased it.
David, do you want to comment on that?
There's a couple of things there. I mean, it actually, the story illustrates some of the problems when people when they have other health problems. So you're weighing up both the side effects of that drug and whether it might affect, other medical problems that the patient's got. Also, that description of the toes going up. Oftentimes, when patients have had Parkinson's for a number of years, they may get a variation to the sensitivity to the medication. So that what she might be describing is dystonia or involuntary posturing of the toes and feet, and that might be about a question of altering the dose or the timing of medication, or thinking in, adding in maybe another drug that maybe smooth out some of those fluctuations and things. But you may be trying to balance that with, if there's other medical problems, that might be a problem as well. So, for example, all the drugs we use at Parkinson tend to lower blood pressure, for example. So the last thing you want to do is, if you've got someone who's elderly, who's maybe on blood pressure tablets, is, make them more likely to fall, for example. So you almost need to think about, if I'm trying to solve one problem, am I going to make another problem worse?
Rob, let's give the final word to you, because we're nearly at the end of the hour. Are you hopeful there might be some medical breakthrough in the next few years? Is that something that you think about?
Yeah, it was at the beginning, but I think I've heard many people say it's always 5 years down. We think in 5 years this thing's quite interesting. This is quite interesting. It might maybe 5 years, then 5 years passes and it doesn't happen. I think, I hope hope for the best, expect the worst. I hope it will happen. I mean, there seems to be a lot of work going on, but it doesn't seem to translate to something happening that's going to be significant in stopping the progression. But yeah, you've got to be hopeful. But no sign yet, I don't think.
And David Nicholl, do you see anything on the horizon that Rob could be hopeful about?
Always, it's a bit like your book about lying. Always. Just can't someone that says the 5-year plan on medicating Parkinson's. But I think the fact that we understand the biology much better than we did even 5-10 years ago means there's much greater opportunity to design proper neuroprotective drugs. So that, I think, is a hopeful sign. I'm not going to say 5 years, though.
Okay, all right, fine. That's probably for the best.
Listen, you've both been brilliant guests. Thank you very much indeed to Dr. David Nicholl and to Rob Burley. And if you'd like to read Rob's book, it is called Why Is This Lying Bastard Lying to Me? And it's 25 seconds off the watershed at 9 o'clock, so I think I can get away with that, can't I? Thank you both very much indeed. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about prison officers. And I think prison officers are one group in society that we don't talk about enough, because I think they have one of the most difficult jobs in the country. And when you find out that in the last year, 10,568 prison officers were assaulted, I mean, and that's a rise by a third in a year. I think that deserves a little bit of commentary, don't you? And a little bit of discussion. So, what's it like being a prison officer in 2025? Have you been a victim of one of these assaults? What could the system do to reduce this figure over the next few years? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.